Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure for me to share this very wonderful occasion with the Consul General, Susanna. George Voinovich and I go back many, many, many years, probably 40, 45. A person of integrity, honest in every way, which is so rare sometimes in public officials, except for Mike Polensik. But seriously, George, at every level of government that he served, was the epitome of honesty, and throughout all of his different responsibilities, he never, ever lost touch with the people and never lost touch with his heritage. We were so proud several years ago to put into the Serbian Cultural Garden, I must say, a huge, huge rock with a big memorial to Senator Voinovich. Because as you all know, his mother was Slovenian, his father was Serbian, and architect. We have so many stories we could relate, and we don't have the next 3 hours to do that. But I can just tell you, on several trips where George and Janet and my wife Carol and I would go down to Cincinnati for the big tennis tournament where Novak Djokovic was playing, and the deal was Senator Voinovich was on the board of Southern Western, which sponsored the tournament, so George had good seats. And the deal was he would provide the 4 tickets and I would do the driving. So 4.5 hours to Cincinnati, 4.5 hours back the next day, 2 years in a row. My wife Carol and Janet said they could write at least one book just listening to all the stories that George and I exchanged in the political world. But we're very, very pleased to have honored Senator Voinovich in the Serbian Garden, to recognize the half of him that is Serbian, and we certainly are very, very pleased that the Slovenian community under Joe Simperman and Susanna are recognizing him with this wonderful exhibition. Godspeed.
Hvala. And you forgot to thank the Cleveland, Kurentovanje and Slovenian Museum and Archives, but that will be heard later. So it's a great honor to welcome you tonight at this event dedicated to the life and legacy of George Voinovich, a true friend of Slovenia. His bond with Slovenia was both personal and public. So as we already heard, through his mother heritage, he developed a deep respect for Slovenian culture, which later shaped his lifelong support for Slovenia's international standing and relationship with the United States. As mayor of Cleveland, a city often described as the capital of the Slovenian diaspora, and governor of Ohio, he strengthened ties between the United States and Slovenia, understanding them as political, human, and cultural bridges. As a US Senator, a member of key committees, including foreign relations, he was a strong advocate of NATO enlargement and committed supporter of Slovenia's membership. At a decisive time, he welcomed Slovenian leaders, offered strategic advice, and actively supported Slovenia's integration into Euro-Atlantic structures. His efforts went beyond formal diplomacy. He lobbied, explained, persuaded, and believed in Slovenia's place in the transatlantic community. He also championed stability in Southeast Europe, notably advocating for the establishment of an international fund for the mining and assistance to mine victims, linking Slovenia and the US in advancing peace and security. In 2005, President Janez Drnovšek awarded him the Golden Order for Merit for strengthening Slovenian-American friendship and supporting Slovenia's international recognition, describing him as a long-standing and trusted friend, one whom Slovenian leaders always sought out for open, honest conversation and wise counsel. From restoring Cleveland finances to serving 2 terms as governor of Ohio and US Senator, he was known for responsibility, independence, integrity, and bipartisan reflect. Humble and modest, he believed public office was about service, not personal gain. Colleagues from both parties described him as a man for whom politics was never about himself, but always about helping others. His legacy lives on in Cleveland and in Ohio, including within the Slovenian American community. Deeply symbolic, his final public appearance was a Slovenian reception in Cleveland, marking Slovenia's independence, a fitting conclusion to a life dedicated to friendship, dialogue, and mutual respect. This exhibition remembers George Voinovich as a statesman and a bridge builder, embodying responsibility, integrity, friendship, and service. 10 years on, his example continues to inspire, and his friendship with Slovenia remains an enduring part of our shared history. Thank you.
Sorry, but I just thought of a footnote to what I said. Years ago, when George Voinovich was running for governor of Ohio, he came out to Painesville to the Oktoberfest, run by Steve Bensick of the old Hofbrauhaus. And at that time, I had a Serbian tamburica band. I had to do something to keep my sanity as publisher of The Plain Dealer. So George comes out to the Oktoberfest, and Bensick lavishes him with barbecued lamb and slivovitz. And we serenaded him and his entourage. As we concluded, he said, "You know, this is really a lot of fun." And I said, "If it's so much fun, when you become governor, maybe you could have something at the governor's mansion. I'll bring the music and the slivovitz." Now, this was in September. In January, when he was sworn in, the very next day, he called me. He said, "Were you serious about coming down with the musicians and the slivovitz?" I said, "Yes, I was." So we picked a date in June. We went down there. He had a great gathering of the ethnic community from the state of Ohio. We had great food and plenty of slivovitz. And after everyone had left, there was just the musicians, George and me. He says, "You know, we should start singing some of those old Serbian songs that my father taught me." And that's the way we concluded the night, singing Serbian songs after a big party at the governor's mansion.
Good evening, everybody. Dobrodošli and welcome. My name is Nicole Kusold-Matheo, and on behalf of Cleveland Kurentovanje, we and our partners, I'm honored to welcome you to tonight's exhibition, opening, and panel discussion. Together, we can do it, George Voinovich and the work of the government. Thank you for joining us, friends, neighbors, and collaborators, and community members. Your presence reflects something we value deeply: the power of coming together to share stories that help us understand one another, ourselves, our shared history, and our shared hopes and dreams. At Cleveland Kurentovanje, a festival that is week-long, in which we are in the midst of, we seek to explore the many facets of Slovenian and Slovenian American arts and culture, not as something frozen in the past, but as a living force that continues to shape our communities today. We believe culture lives most fully when it is shared through conversation, memory, and collaboration. Our efforts are about bringing people together and helping to create moments and experiences that would otherwise not exist. This evening is one of those moments. Through this exhibition and panel discussion, we're reflecting on the life and legacy of George Voinovich, not only as a public official, but as a person shaped by his Slovenian and Serbian heritage, his deep faith, and an unwavering commitment to serve his community. We hope that tonight serves as an example of what it can mean to be a friend, a colleague, a Clevelander, and an American, and a global citizen, engaged, curious, and committed to the common good. We are deeply grateful to our partners, panelists, and moderator for lending their voices and perspectives to tonight's event. And I need to recognize a few festival sponsors and grantors who have made this presentation tonight possible. Thank you to our 2026 leadership sponsors, Ohio University Voinovich School of Leadership and Public Service, Nikki J. Antonio, and thank you to our 2026 presenting sponsors, the American Mutual Life Association and Shalika Drug. I also need to thank some of our grantors. Cleveland Kurentovanje is supported in part by the residents of Cuyahoga County through a public grant from the Cuyahoga Arts and Culture Fund. Cleveland Kurentovanje is made possible in part by an investment of public funds from the Ohio Arts Council. And finally, thank you to the Office of Slovenians Abroad for their financial support. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce Greg Nosen, President of Slovenian Museum and Archives.
Thanks so much, Nicole, and dobrodošli, welcome everyone to Together We Can Do It, George Voinovich and the Work of Politics. As you already know, I'm Greg Nosen, the president of the Slovenian Museum and Archives and the curator of the exhibition that some of you may have seen already. And I'm going to make this quick because we have a conversation to begin. I do want to thank you for joining us this evening in an evening that celebrates Senator George Voinovich, whose memory is a blessing and whose life and work continue to inspire us. For me, the partnership and the collaboration that this exhibition has brought with us is a living example of Senator Voinovich's promise that together we can do it, and a reminder to me that most often the most important things we do could never be done alone, but can only be done in partnership with other people, and we wouldn't want it any other way, because the things that we end up creating wouldn't be half as good, and the creating wouldn't be half as fun. So 1,000 thanks to our partners and colleagues on this project, Nicole Kuzold-Matheu, who you've met, Joe Simperman, who you'll meet in a moment, folks from the Slovenian Museum and Archives, Luka Zibelnik and Julie Tromba, especially our archival team, Brandon Rood and Lily Martin, without whom this wouldn't have been possible for sure, and our new and special friends at Ohio University, not only in the Honors Tutorial College, but also in the Mon Center for Archives and Special Collections, and in the Voinovich School of Leadership and Public Service. So thank you again. Thank you for coming, and I wish you a glorious evening.
We invited you all, and it's most important that you're here. We also sent a few invitations to people who had the honor of knowing and working with Senator Voinovich. So please, I'll draw your attention to two very brief videos.
Good evening. Tonight we celebrate the remarkable life and leadership of our dear friend, George Voinovich. George was a great mayor, great governor, great United States Senator. But above all, he was a great man. I was lucky enough to have a front row seat to George's approach to leadership, working harder and smarter, doing more with less. And I did that as his lieutenant governor in his first term as governor. Another one of his sayings, "Together we can do it," is how he governed. He emphasized teamwork, and he was right. We are stronger together. Later, George was elected to the United States Senate, and he joined me as we represented the great state of Ohio. And again, it was an honor to serve with him. Honoring George in this way with an exhibit of his life is really, I know, a labor of love for so many of you. You've worked to comb through photos, artifacts, and so many other materials as you highlight his Slovenian and Serbian roots. Clevelanders, Ohioans, and others from around the world will enjoy and marvel at all that he accomplished during his life. Thank you to the Slovenian Museum and Archives, Global Cleveland, the Voinovich School of Leadership and Public Service, as well as the George V. Voinovich Collection at Ohio University. George was a remarkable Ohioan, and one certainly worth celebrating. His deep Catholic faith sustained him through his life and helped him weather the ups and downs of public life. He loved his family, his wife of 54 years, Janet, who he always called his best decision, and their children, George, Betsy, Peter, and Molly. And he delighted in the expansion of his family with the addition of daughters-in-law, son-in-law, and grandchildren. We're all lucky to have had him serve Ohio so very, very well for so many years. Thank you so much for honoring his life and his legacy.
Hello to everyone gathered to celebrate the opening of the Together We Can Do It George Voinovich and the Work of Government exhibit. Now I know Cleveland likes to think of itself as the most Slovenian city in the USA, but Minnesota has a pretty big Slovenian population, nearly 9,000. So once George left DC, I became the most famous Slovenian American in Washington until Melania arrived. She was actually born an hour from where my relatives are from in Slovenia. And as I said once at the National Prayer Breakfast, every time I look at her, it's like looking in the mirror. Okay, not quite. So at one point, we had 3 senators who were Slovenian, which is crazy because Slovenians like 0.00003% of the world's population. But it was 3% of the U.S. Senate when I served alongside Senator Harkin and then, of course, the man of the hour, Senator Voinovich. In the time that I served with George, I saw up close the gritty, can-do approach that the title of this exhibit reflects. Together, we can do it. I got to work with George on bread and butter issues like infrastructure funding. As my friend in the House and another Slovenian American we miss very much, Jim Oberstar, used to say, there's no such thing as a Republican highway or a Democratic highway. There's no such thing as a Democratic bridge or a Republican bridge, and George believed that too. I can't think of a better example than George's commitment to service than when he crossed the aisle and was instrumental in helping pass landmark hate crimes legislation after decades of trying. And we are grateful to George for his work to expand NATO to include new members like Slovenia. For more than 20 years, Slovenia has been a reliable and valued ally in NATO, and of course before that, and we know our alliance with NATO has never been more important. Slovenia is a beautiful country, but also a stable and friendly trading partner. And I'd like to do more trade with Slovenia, not less. As you all know well, before he was senator, George was mayor of Cleveland, and he helped bring the city back from the financial brink and turn it into a 3-time All-American City winner. He also played a big part in bringing the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame to Cleveland, even though he preferred polka. Senator Voinovich's work embodied his mantra to work harder and smarter and do more with less. And it is the same hardscrabble approach that we learned from our parents and grandparents in Slovenia and before. Whether it's a commitment to hard work or celebrating our cuisine, I do my part to carry on Slovenian traditions. Every Thursday when the Senate is in session, I host Minnesota Morning, where I open up my office to all people who are visiting from Minnesota. Okay, we invite you too. And every week I serve good northern Minnesota-made Slovenian pizza. It's something I remember my grandma making. She'd set up 2 card tables, roll the dough really thin, and fill it with apples or walnuts. Of course, America and Slovenia are united by more than our love of delicious baked goods. We share the fundamental values of liberty and democracy. Both of our countries shared the dream of being an independent, self-governing nation, and both countries made it happen. So we are grateful for the role that Senator Voinovich and his wife Janet, who I also got to know, especially on a trip my husband and I took with them with a number of other senators to Canada, but the role that they played in building a stronger America, a legacy that will live on far beyond the walls of this exhibit. As your former governor, John Kasich, said about George, he was a unifier who thought outside the box, never gave up, and worked hard for the ideas he believed in up until the very end of his life. That says it all. It meant a lot to be asked to be part of this, and forever remember my friend George. Thank you, and enjoy the day.
Faith, Dr. Timothy, Elizabeth, Councilman, if you'd please come up. You don't need my help. Come on. Right here, please. Right there, yeah. Faith, would you move down one? Good evening, everyone. There is one more message that we received, and we're so grateful to someone who also knew and worked with our great senator. And this is a message from our senator, Senator John Husted. For nearly 5 decades, George V. Voinovich faithfully served the great state of Ohio and the American people. As we mark 10 years since his passing this year, we celebrate his life, his achievements on behalf of all Ohioans. Under his leadership as governor, Voinovich led Ohio to a 25-year low in unemployment and created more than 500,000 jobs. In Washington, Mr. Voinovich was a giant in the Senate. Thank you to Mr. Greg Noson, the team at Ohio University, the Cleveland Kurentovanje leadership team for curating this exhibit at the Slovenian Museum and Archives and celebrating George Voinovich's legacy in public service. I'm proud to say that I carry a bit of him with me when I remember one of his famous philosophies: work harder and smarter and do more with less. We will always remember his service on behalf of Ohioans and honor his legacy. Thanks to Senator Husted for those remarks. We're very fortunate tonight, and I'll say to our panelists, you were all recommended by at least 5 people. When you try to look at the measure of a person whose life is as great and good as Senator Voinovich, it's not hard to find people who know him, but we wanted to make sure that we had some representation from each part of his service. So if you would allow me to introduce our fantastic panelists. First, I would like to introduce Ms. Faith Voinovich from the Ohio Innovation Fund, the granddaughter of Senator Voinovich, and someone who I know he is so proud of, you, Faith, as we all are. We're so grateful for you being here today. Thank you. We are very fortunate to have someone who not only knew and reported and studied him, interviewed him, asked him questions, but someone who was close to him and is going to speak to some of those important moments. The opinion director and editor of Cleveland.com editorial page and the director of the editorial board, Cleveland.com, and the Cleveland Plain Dealer, Miss Elizabeth Sullivan. I didn't know this, but when we were talking to the Reverend Dr. Theophilus Cavanis of Greater Abyssinia Baptist Church, he spoke of the time that he worked at City Hall and the great work that he did. For so many of us, Doctor, you are a legend, and to be with you tonight is an honor, and we know that the Senator is so thrilled to have hired you, and we're so grateful for your presence here tonight. Dr. Reverend Cavanis. Mr. Timothy Cosgrove, that many of you know. I remember the first time that I met Tim, he told me stories of when he knew then Mayor Voinovich and Governor Voinovich. Tim is someone who does great work on behalf of healthcare and so many important causes in Ohio. He is chief partner at Cosgrove John Henry, Mr. Timothy Cosgrove. And finally, it was interesting hearing Senator Klobuchar talking about the second best pizza in the United States. She was talking about her being the only Slovenian senator. Well, we are very fortunate to have the Dean of Cleveland City Council, Councilman Michael D. Polensek, who was elected in 1977. Next year, Councilman Polensek will be celebrating his 50th year with the City of Cleveland in public service. And we're so thrilled that Mayor Brennan is here tonight from the America 250 campaign. As we celebrate America's 250th birthday, Councilman Michael Polensek has served in public life for 20% of our nation's history. So we're going to have fun tonight because you're all amazing people. And I'm going to ask you all a few questions, and then we're going to ask people specifically. So one of the things, Faith, is you had to share your grandpa with a city, a state, a country, and then a world. And we knew him, and we also knew that he did not like to schedule events on Sundays because that was time with the family. You're an adult now. Can you talk a little bit about what it means recognizing that you have a room full of people who cherish him and cherish you as a result?
It is such a great gift and a joy to be here tonight and to feel the energy in this room. I had the honor of having him as my grandpa for 19 years of my life, but I've gotten to know him arguably even better over the last 10 years since his passing, thanks to everyone in this room and your stories with him and the work that each of you do to keep his memory and impact alive. And so, yes, there's the side of sharing, and Sundays were absolutely precious for spending time together, but there's also the incredible gift of being able to connect with folks that he was able to have an impact on and inspire over his career. And so I'm grateful to be here.
Thank you. And thanks to the Voinovich family that's here as well. Thank you for allowing us to honor him. Dr. Cavanis, when we spoke with you about tonight, you talked about your personal relationship with him, his time at City Hall, and I think many of us can reflect that Mayor Voinovich came in at a time when our city's finances were troubled and we had a real question of confidence. But you said something that struck me in the call for this session, and you reminded us that when Senator Voinovich, Mayor Voinovich, became mayor, it was barely a decade since the Huff riots came to Cleveland. And in a city that has often not always known its path when it comes to the entire city, our African American sisters and brothers, our Eastern European sisters and brothers, people from all over, what was it like working inside of City Hall for a white mayor who clearly knew how to speak the same language on the east side and the west side?
When you think of George Victor Voinovich, you think of, first of all, a decent man of character, integrity, honesty, and a feel of love for everybody. This man had a heart of gold, knew nothing of any hatred or hostility toward anyone, a man of great profundity with regard to feeling and sensitivity to people. And for African Americans, this gentleman has probably done more in this city than any other mayor. I talked to George Forbes the other day. I've talked to him quite often. He says that George Voinovich was possibly the greatest mayor in the city of Cleveland. That was saying something because he was able to bring together forces that were antagonistic, they were divided, and he became the cement that brought them together. This man was larger than life. He was a human being. He had the feeling of love for everybody. I don't think there was a hate born in his body or any kind of divisiveness in his being. He was a gentleman to the core and loved people regardless of their race, creed, or color. And let me be partisan and say he did more for the African American community than any other man I would think of. This man was stalwart, and he did something for African Americans that really will go down in history as the salvation of us, because he saved Central State University that was about to close. And it was monumental. I remember George Forbes, Jim Carney, and Carol Hoover were in his mansion down in Columbus. We were there and we were talking. And when he finished with Carney and Forbes and Carol, we went to the back. He said, "Theo," which was my kind of, a bad part, but what they call it. But he said, "Theo, I got some bad news for you." He said, "We've got to close Central State University." That broke my heart. because were it not for Central State University and the educational pursuit of African Americans throughout this country, Ohio was one of the greatest states for doing that. And here we are saying that we've got to close it. There were issues that had to be reconciled, and George said he had to close it. That broke my heart because I'd known of the historicity of the school, and we could ill afford to have that to happen. And so I talked to him. I said, plainly, my brother, if Central State closes, I said, your memory will go down in history as something that African Americans would deplore from now on. He said, I think I understand what you're saying. Now think about it. The legislature was all poised to close it. The Leontine prices of the world and all of the history that goes with African Americans, where we've come from, and the like, and how down we were and what this would have done. And he said, let me think about it. And after about a couple of weeks, he called me and said, Theo, I tell you what, I think I can do something about this. And he gave me an arduous task. He said, but I got something I want you to do. He said, you've got to go down to the Central State and tell the president to resign. That was awesome. This man I loved, the president of Central State University, Dr. Arthur Thomas, I loved him. He'd give me a law degree, honorary law degree, so I don't know anything about law, but he gave it to me. But he had been, Dr. Thomas had been everything to me. He had preached at our church. He had been so much, had done so many good things. And I had to go and tell Dr. Thomas. I said, Dr. Thomas, I hate to tell you this. He preached at my church, all of this. And I said, the governor's got to close Central State. I said, all the statistics bear toward it being closed and the like. And he said, you mean to tell me it's going to be closed? I said, yes, it's going to be closed. I said, the only way that we can keep it open is for you to give me your resignation. He said, well, let me just tell you, I love this university, but for the sake of its closing, I would gladly give you my resignation. So he gave me his resignation. I took it back to the governor. He took that, and he turned the legislature around and kept Central State University open. You've got to understand what a great thing this was, how the African-American community would have been decimated, and the country would have been affected if it were not for that one decision that this great man did. He did it with courage, he did it with authority, and he saved the day for us. And so when George Forbes said that this was the greatest mayor in the history of Cleveland, for those who before him and after, he meant it, because this was the kind of man George Victor Voinovich was. I loved him to death. It breaks my heart that he's not here tonight. And having worked with him in Cleveland for his mayorship, and then going down to the Columbus and staying with him for 8 years down there as chairman of the Ohio Civil Rights Commission, I loved him to death. And whenever he had a problem, he knew that Theo would be there to help him.
Thank you. Thank you. Truly remarkable. Councilman Plensick, you shared 40 years of public service with the senator. He served diligently, as did you. You were both sons of Collinwood. You were both Slovenians. You both served immigrant communities, African-American communities. And in 1977, you were in a different place in your career. How did his life mentor you? How did he affect you, Councilman? And how did he instill this sense of longevity and endurance that it seems like Slovenians just don't stop?
Well, I had the pleasure to meet him in 1976 when he was county auditor. That's where I really first met him up face. We knew who he was in the neighborhood. Obviously, my mother was a great supporter of George Voinovich, as a lot of people were. And as we all know, in Collinwood was a heavily Democratic community at the time, very heavy Democratic. But George knew how to work across the aisle. He knew how to work with the Democrats in the community, and was very successful in working with the Democrats. And I want to say this and I want to just be thankful to be up here with the panel with Betsy and Reverend Gavanis and his granddaughter and Tim. And I want to say to Alex how nice it is to see you. And I miss Mosaic, I can tell you that right now, at the PD. We watched him, we observed him, And when he became mayor, became mayor at a very turbulent time in our city's history. We had just gone through default. There was a great deal of turmoil within the departments and divisions of City Hall. And so I came in, I was a freshman councilman. We were going from 33 councilmen to 21. Great hemorrhage, great carnage. And there was a group of us that came in. There were 13 new members. The council came in. Mike White and myself were a part of that group that came in. So we really didn't know what to expect from the standpoint of what was going to happen within the confines of City Hall. But to our amazement, as we've been told, and as you know, he could work across the aisle. He was a Republican governor, a Republican mayor with a city council that was all Democrat. So he knew what his limitations were, obviously, but he also knew by working together, he could get things done. And when Reverend Cavanagh left City Council, he became George's representative, the liaison, and what he doesn't want to say at this platform, many times he was the glue that held things together between City Hall, between the council and the Voinovich administration. At times was the referee between George and the two Georges, as we all know. So we were able to work together. We were able to focus not just on downtown, because he realized as downtown went, so did the neighborhoods and vice versa. But look at the things we were able to do. 3 times the All-American City, the Comeback City. He was recognized nationally. He was president of the National League of Cities. When you look at the positions that he had held as a mayor, it's incredible. But again, it was that ability to work across the aisle. And I have so many fond memories of him, different issues, different times. As I was driving here, there was only one time in all the years that I knew him, that I worked with him, that he asked me to vote on something. I don't know if it was for or against. I can't even remember anymore what it was. And I told him, I can't do that. I can't vote for that, or I can't vote against it. And he accepted that. I didn't have to worry about the snowplows getting diverted. I didn't have to worry about the chuck holes not getting patched. I didn't have to worry about any retribution because he understood the politics of the institution. And what I also need to say, Mary Rose Okar, may she rest in peace, she would tell me how her and Lou Stokes, the great honorable dear friend of mine, and Reverend Kev's dear friend as well. And you got to say, Reverend Cavanagh is 97 years old, okay? Okay? I want to know what the hell he's taking because I want some of it, okay? That's what I want. But Mary Rose told me, she said, Mike, we would sit down and Lou would tell us what he needed for his district. We would tell, Mary Rose, I would tell them, George would tell us, and we'd walk out of that room and we would support each other's projects. Now think about today in a political world that we're in today. That would never happen. Today it's adversarial. It wasn't adversarial. What it was we got to get things done. We got to make the city work. We got to make Northeast Ohio work. And so from my perspective as being the Dean of Cleveland City Council, I longed for that. I miss that environment of being able to sit down and say, you know what, I need this. I need your help. You got to help me on this project. That's missing. So in March, a group of us are going to Washington from City Council, including myself, because we're greatly concerned about the environment that we're dealing with today and what risk the city of Cleveland is at from a standpoint of funding of projects, et cetera. I also want to tell you another great story. He's running for mayor, running for re-election, and I'm sure you'll like this. Pat Sweeney's running against him, dear old friend Pat Sweeney. And who was a legend in the Ohio House. He was state senator at the time. And we're in Collinwood, and it's at the Italian Cooperative Association Hall. Room's packed with people, just a cross-section of Collinwood. Black, Italian, Slovenian, you name it, it was there in that room. And Pat gets up, and George speaks first, and Pat speaks, and Pat does what I thought to be a pretty decent job as he's speaking. But at the end of his speech, he says, you know what the problem is with George Voinovich? And there's a silence over the room. He says, he's got taffy pockets. Now, in the Irish community, taffy pockets means you're kind of cheap, you know, you're tight. And so he comes and he sits down next to me, and he leans over to me and he says, how did I do? And I said, Pat, you didn't do bad, but the comment about the taffy pockets, he said, what's wrong with that? I said, Pat, everybody in this room has got taffy pockets, including me, okay? So, and he had this strange look on his face. So, but again, it was that his ability to relate to people, to get things done downtown, the things that he worked on, the cultural gardens, Playhouse Square, again, the major projects downtown, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with Mike White, worked very closely with former Mayor Mike White, and all the other folks that came before him and came after him. There was that relationship, always putting the city of Cleveland first. And when he left office, he would still call me, and he would call me about if there was a problem on the street. He would call me, and I'd say, put Janet on the phone. And I'd say, why? Because I said, she's the only one that would endorse me. You wouldn't, okay? Because he was a Republican, he couldn't endorse me. But Janet would endorse me, and she'd be on my campaign literature. So we had this thing going back and forth, and we'd have breakfast now and then up on 185th Street at Gus's restaurant, Gus's Diner, where a lot of you know. And I would sit there, I'm sitting with him one day, and we're leaving, and I get the bill, and I'm saying, wait, something's not right here. He's a United States Senator. He's a former governor. He's a former mayor, and I'm picking up the bill here for breakfast, okay? And so, but we had a great relationship. I miss him immensely. He never left the city, stayed on Rosecliff, was committed to the neighborhood, cared about the institutions and the folks in the neighborhood, and I maintain this. I think he could work with anybody, regardless of their nationality, their race, their religion, because he realized it wasn't about him at the end of the day, it was about the community, it was about the state of Ohio, about our country. And the other thing I keep saying to myself, what would he do, if he was here today, what would he think about what's going on in Ukraine? He fought for captive nations. He fought for Slovenian independence of the Balkans. He fought for Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia. I think of all the things that he fought for, NATO, and to see today what's happening in Europe and in Eastern Europe, I think he'd be appalled by what's happening. The lack of support for Ukraine, the lack of support for nations who are trying to defend themselves from the communists, from occupation. And I say that because if it wasn't for him, the action that he took, along with Amy Klobuchar, who you saw on the video, and many other people in the United States Senate, it would have taken time to recognize the Republic of Slovenia. It would have taken a great deal of time. So I appreciate the work that he did on behalf of the people of the city of Cleveland. He would also say, him along with our dear late friend, the Honorable Stephanie Tubbs Jones, once a railroader, always a railroader. He never forgot where he came from, never forgot the roots that he had. And as Reverend Cav said, just a man of great dignity, honor, and again, somehow, we got to get back to that. We got to get back to that in our country, where we can disagree today and be agreeable tomorrow, where we don't become adversarial, where we don't become enemies, and somehow, because I had a prominent black minister tell me on Wednesday, he said to me, and we're talking, he said to me, I don't know if we can ever get back to that again. That in itself scared me. That scared me. That he didn't think we could get back to that. And he said, I pray every night that we can get back to being civil toward one another, that we can work together for the best interests of this country.
From your mouth to God's ears, Councilman, and I want to make sure, I want to hear from you, Reverend, in 1 second. I want to ask you, Tim Cosgrove, you started with him when it was early in his career, early in yours. You worked with him. We hear all these, we know that he was a bipartisan He reached across the aisle. His goal was effectiveness and decency in government. Can you talk about a time when you saw him finding a solution instead of winning a political argument?
Thanks, and thanks for putting this together. This is such an important time to have a conversation like this and to really commemorate the career of somebody who had made such a great difference. And I just thank you for doing that. I also want to say, as I sit here, we talk about Senator Voinovich, but our heart goes out to Janet too.
Right.
Because we all know without Janet Voinovich, there wouldn't be a George Voinovich. So our heart's with her tonight as well, and because she was part of the team. And I also want to thank, there's so many people here who worked for the senator in different capacities. I feel honored to be here, and I feel like I'm speaking on their behalf a bit. And it has been such an honor to be part of the Voinovich political family and to have played some little part in such an incredible legacy. And I think all of us we talk all the time, and we're all still inspired by not only what he did professionally, but who he was as a man and a person, and who he and Janet Voinovich were. And that inspires us to this day. And I think that, what made him so unique, to your point, George Voinovich, and it was simple, really. He understood that public service was about serving people and solving problems.
That's right.
And it wasn't an ideological crusade. Now, he had his ideology for sure, but he understood that politics was a game of inclusion. And he always, what I admired most about him, and what is so rare, is when George Voinovich looked at a problem, his first instinct was to figure out what's the solution to the problem. How do I bring people together to solve a problem? And his second instinct, of course, was politics. You don't get elected 3 times as mayor of Cleveland as a Republican, and at the time break all records getting reelected, without being pretty shrewd. But he always focused on solutions to a problem. And one of my favorite stories, and this is when he was governor, and most folks don't realize this, and Mr. Pogue, who's in the front row here, was sitting in this meeting, and we were in New York in the Rolling Stone boardroom when we were being told that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame was being pulled from Cleveland. And it was really an incredible meeting, and at that time, Albert Ratner and Mayor White got up and gave a performance, and we bought some time, and we got in the state plane coming home, and the governor looks at everybody on the plane and said, we're never going to fund it the way they want to fund it, but I'm going to go back and we're going to put together a package and we're going to fund it at the state and we're going to save the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which, we're now defined by that. But again, there was a guy who had a very practical approach, and that's just how he approached things. Yeah. And, it was interesting. I was with him in City Hall and with him in the governor's office, and the hardest thing for him to get used to in Columbus was the Republican caucus and the Democrat caucus, because he wasn't, having worked as mayor of Cleveland for 10 years, it was just the politics of it. And he was very close at the time to Jane Campbell, worked on a lot of legislation with her, and caught a lot of flack for it, but it never bothered him. He just forged forward. So just a remarkable person.
Thank you, and we're grateful Mayor Campbell's joined us today. We're grateful for that. We're grateful Mr. Pogue's here as well. So many people. I don't want to get in trouble, but I did see State Rep Davila as well, and a few other folks from the governor's office and the Secretary of State's office. We really appreciate it. Thank you. And I'm told the County Executive Chris Ronan is here as well. So thank you, County Executive, for being here. I'm sorry I can't see anybody.
Judge Jeff Johnson.
And I apologize, Judge Jeff Johnson is here, and I'm already in trouble. So Senator Voinovich saved me. You've all mentioned the senator had a way of working through hard things. Reverend, you spoke of it when he came to City Hall. Faith, you spoke of his role in your family. Tim, you talked about his role with saving the Rock Hall. Councilman, you talked about the deficit. Ms. Sullivan, when we had a chance to talk to you, you shared some, I'll just say Greg and Nicole and I were really just blown away by the phone call with you. You traveled with him to nations that were not that long before under oppressive regimes, nations that were coming out of war. And you saw it from such a behind-the-scenes perspective. Would you just share a little bit about that? Because we've spoke of NATO, we've spoke of Cleveland and Ohio and America, but you had a view with Senator Voinovich in the world.
So I'll address that, but I want to talk a little bit about the many aspects of George Voinovich that I experienced, because I literally moved to Cleveland 2 weeks before his election as mayor. And so at the time, I'd been hired by the Plain Dealer, but I was also stringing for Business Week magazine. And I remember the bureau chief of that operation going to interview then new mayor of Voinovich, and coming back, he was so blue. He said, "Those blue eyes, those piercing blue eyes." And I knew immediately, this is a guy who can just turn people around his little finger, really, honestly. But then, as time went on, I segued to various other roles at the Plain Dealer, including covering foreign affairs. I have, an academic background. I spent time in Zagreb learning Serbo-Croatian when I was in college. I was a Russian studies major, so I spoke a lot of Slavic languages, and so it was kind of natural, being in Cleveland, that the Plain Dealer would send me to cover the breakup of Yugoslavia. And in fact, on a table back there, I read a copy of a letter that Senator Voinovich, and this was one of the key roles he played in the Senate, besides being, a deficit hawk and some of these other things, was actually trying to focus attention on this brewing conflict. And in 1991, he sent a letter to, President H.W. Bush, warning of this impending crisis. So he was really quite perspicacious about that. I mean, this was long before even, I think, the CIA predicted war, right? And I wrote an article for the Plain Dealer after traveling through there, also saying this is what we were headed for war. But the governor was appealing directly to the president. And I will say that this is an example to me of the dangers of losing expertise about foreign affairs in government, because I remember, that year that I was in Zagreb on a U.S. government-sponsored program in 1973, they discontinued the funding for that when Nixon did détente with Brezhnev. And that meant that they decided they didn't need to develop expertise about that area. So when this crisis hit, they didn't have people. But there was Voinovich, Senator Voinovich, in Washington continually pushing. And yes, what happened was after the Croatian War, which actually I found his uncle in the Krajina region of Croatia.
Senator Voinovich's uncle.
Senator Voinovich's uncle. In fact, the UNPROFOR, the UN security guards that were trying to guard the remaining Serbian population there, they didn't want me to pass through because it was still kind of a war zone. But I found his uncle and his aunt, who was, that was another Serbian-Slovenian marriage, but that's the way the old Yugoslavia was. But they were living in this kind of bombed-out, cratered town. All their children's houses had been looted, and this was like the ugly underbelly of the wars of Yugoslavia, where it was all the looting that went on. People just used that as an excuse to get other people's stuff. But this was this elderly couple without heat, without running water. His uncle was bedridden, so his wife had to go down this long set of stairs just to get water, and they cooked on this open fire. It was, at any rate, it was really eye-opening about things. But then, I'm going to kind of segue to part of that story, because this is really, at the same time I had an editor at the Plain Dealer who was partly Croatian, and she had lost touch with her family in Croatia. And this was, the family, she asked me to try to find her. The family was still in the same place, but this new government had changed all the street names so that the mail wasn't being delivered. And it was sort of this, at any rate, talking to this Croatian family and then the Voinovich family really made me realize that this war didn't need to have happened. These were the same people with the same lives, and yet and yet somehow they
That's right.
had,
Let's clap for that. That's right.
yeah, somehow they had been, through the toxicity of hate, they were being fed all this propaganda. This is what, and I remember writing a column about that. At any rate, segue to the Kosovo War in 1999, and I was in Albania trying to get sort of that Albanian perspective, and I ran into Senator Voinovich. And I have to say, on that personal level, which he always had that personal level, because my nickname is Betsy, I think he always had this sort of family feeling about me, because we always just synced. But at any rate, he was there with a congressional delegation. He was one of 6. And, I wrote some stories about, he really, besides trying to have the war stop before it could start, now he was trying to not have the United States go to war. Because if you looked at the collection of military, the armada of stuff that was in Albania at that time, that was on the minds of all these congressional folks. So I remember that very much. But then they were going to be helicoptered into a refugee camp up in the hills in Kosovo, in Albania, but these are all Kosovo refugees. So I was able to go along on that. And that was incredibly eye-opening. I wouldn't have gotten there if it weren't for him, but to see the deplorable conditions, the knee-deep mud that these people were standing in, and there in the middle of them was this man with a designer belt. So I found out he was the head of that village that had been evacuated. But at any rate, just him doing that favor for me was, like many things that came out of my discussions with George Voinovich, very eye-opening about the reality of that conflict. And if the US government had been as engaged in that conflict as he was, as well-informed, I really firmly believe we would not even have gotten to the point of war and killing and, a country riven apart. And I actually applaud that the ethnic communities in the old Yugoslavia now have their own countries, but it shouldn't have taken violence and bloodshed to get there. So does that answer your
Thank you so
query?
much. It makes me, yes, thank you. Truly, it, Mr. Laushi was mayor, governor, senator. Mr. Voinovich was mayor, governor, senator. From what you're saying, I only wish you would have, gone on to the next step. And I think our world would have been in a different place. Reverend Cavness, we've heard from folks in the panel about those moments that, but for Mr. Voinovich, we wouldn't be in this situation. We've also heard about his incredible acts of kindness. And there was something that you wanted to comment on when Councilman Polensek was speaking.
Mike mentioned the fact that this man was a man of faith. I mean, a true Christian, a man of integrity and faith. He did not act one way today and tomorrow another day, or be publicly this and that. He was a genuine person. What he was all the time was what he was genuinely. And being a man of faith, he called me the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. He said, Theo, you're the Holy Spirit, because I had to work between two Georges, George on this end and George on that end. And he would say, which means that he incorporated his faith in his actions. He did not just act one way, but what he did was right and wrong, righteousness, because it emanated, I think, from the genuine Christian man that he was. And he always did that. And always concerned about the least of our brothers and our sisters. Mm-hmm. Most people get to that point where they care for those who are down, least and left out and all like that. But George Voinovich had a sensitivity to reach the least of our brothers and sisters, and those who were down. Did more for the African-American community than you would ever imagine. If I were to list it, it'd be too long. But I remember one instance where George's religiosity really manifested itself. And that was one time when George Forbes had not paid his water bill. Colossal. It was my job to keep them together. So I had one George on this end and one George on that end. One cussing George on this end and one every once in a while on the other end. But George would not pay his water bill. Well, and so the mayor said, Theo, you got to go over there and tell him that he's got to pay that water bill because it's escalating and it's now wait a minute. Kucinich had vetoed 79 bills. When George Voinovich came in, all of his years, he only had one. That's when the two Georges worked together. Wow. That's how together he brought folks.
Was it harder to ask the president to resign or to ask George Forbes to pay his water bill?
Listen, George did not pay that water bill. George said, you got to tell him to pay it because the city was being blown up over just a water bill and folk being divided and all like that. And he said, go over there and tell him he got to pay that water bill. And that fiasco with the Cameron, that had just finished. And George was throwing somebody out of his office. And Voinovich was telling me to go over there and talk to us. This ain't the time to talk to George Forbes. He just threw a table at Jeff out there, all her chair. So he was that kind of vulnerable guy. He said, well, you got to tell him to pay that water bill. I said, do you want me to go over there and tell George to pay that water bill? I'm not about to do that. He said, you got to do it. So I went over, I said, George, you got to pay that water bill. He said, you what? And some language he used I cannot use.
You are a reverend.
But anyway, it had become an issue where they were going to be divided. Now, we've done well. We've only had one out of 79 with Kucinich and then one with him, and we were getting all together. And this water bill was going to tear this city apart. George says, I'm not going to pay it. He said, I don't have the money. We knew he had the money. So it was being written up in the papers, and I knew my job was to stay as liaison between these two Georges. So I slipped over to the water department that night and paid that bill.
Oh, my God. That's true. That's true.
I told George the other day, I said, you're a millionaire now, so you really need to pay my damn $400 that you owe me.
With interest.
With interest, right.
Reverend, are you going to go with Cleveland City Council when they go meet with President Trump? Because I think that might be a good thing.
We're not meeting
I
with
think you
Trump.
might be the one able to talk some sense.
But what needs to be said, not only did he pay the water bill, but I was standing behind George when he was fighting with Carl Monday out in that hallway outside the council chamber. And I'm standing behind, I'm thinking, George, please hit Carl Monday. Please hit Carl Monday we can get you arrested.
So we're going to open it up for a few questions. But before we do, Faith, I just want to ask you, you have a blessing because you had the grandpa that you did, but your name also suggests a higher calling. And you're a young professional, you're excelling in your field, and I just wonder, as someone who I think could speak to a generation of people maybe who weren't lucky enough to know your grandpa, what are some things that you would say to them that your grandpa would say to you today about don't give up, have faith, have hope in this country and our state?
I mean, Reverend Kavanis talked about my grandpa's religion, and he spoke frequently about his duty and about the work that he was doing for his immortal soul. Those were his words. His immortal soul.
His immortal soul.
And how can I benefit folks? And this was what he was called to do. I think there's an aspect of what is the problem? How do I find the solution rather than how do I find whose fault it is for the problem? That came out of that, and a willingness to talk with others and understand really where they were coming from, what mattered to them, knowing more of that story and having deep empathy and care genuinely for folks and his fellow men with the next generation. And I share some of the concerns about where we are today. One thing he left with me was I think I was being overwhelmed about colleges or something of that sort that in the grand scheme of things is very small. But he would say, do the best job you can with the job at hand, and the rest will take care of itself. What can you do now? And maybe it's a small step. And for any folks who maybe are feeling similarly concerned of what's going on, what can you do now to move forward, to take that one step, to be of benefit to others, to show that care for the community? And with that comes hope, and comes momentum, and comes the galvanization of other folks that are around you to be able to move forward. And I got the incredible benefit of seeing that firsthand and having those conversations. But for folks that didn't, there still is that lesson that is underneath it of we can do more when we come together and when we listen. I had all sorts of ideas as a young person that probably were not where he was coming from, but he would listen to me even. And one of my favorite memories would be at the Ohio State Fair. We would go, and it was a wonderful day, and he would wear his big cowboy hat and his huge Ohio State buckle, and we would walk down the Midway. And I will acknowledge I was a little bit frustrated at times because I was interested in going on the rides, and he was interested in stopping to talk with anyone who wanted to talk with him about anything under the sun, because he could be there and he could hear from the folks that he cared about and that he was representing and really had that desire. I mean, deep in his core, wanted to understand where people were coming from.
God bless you. God bless you. We're going to take a few questions. I think we have time for just a few questions. And if you would just introduce yourself, please remember questions, not speeches. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tarash Magala.
Tarash Magala.
Question.
Slava Ukraini.
Heroyam Slava. Governor Voinovich, Mayor Voinovich, was really well known for crafting a public-private partnership in this town. He had the business community behind him. How did he do that? What was his secret sauce? And maybe you can elaborate on some of the memories that you had and how he worked with the private sector here to do all the things, help do all the things that he did in the 80s.
Tim?
Yeah, I think the one book he really wrote, I know he was working on one when he passed, but I think he was most proud of that public-private partnership. Right. And to the Reverend's point and to the Councilman's point, this was a guy who believed in people, right? And he was about solving a problem. And he was not afraid to get his hands in stuff. He was very focused on details. But you know, again, we have all learned so much from us, so many of us who are here, because his leadership style was he trusted people that worked for him, right? And you always wanted to deliver for him. But his relationship with the business community, he understood what they could bring to the table. But he was also, and I know Diane Downing is here, and she worked very closely on this as well, he was brilliant. And I mean, again, people don't realize what this man accomplished politically, right? He was elected mayor, Republican elected mayor 3 times. His last race for the U.S. Senate, he's the only Republican to ever win every county in the state when he ran for the United States Senate.
Wow.
But he
wow, really?
And he almost, by the way, I love this statistic, he came within 2 points. I mean, his re-elect for governor, he got 73% of the vote. Wow. 2 more percent in the Democratic Party would have not been a recognized party in the state of Ohio. I mean, you don't accomplish these things. But he understood fundamentally that to be successful, to your point, and he would say this all the time, do a good job at the job you have and the rest will take care of itself. So it was about looking at a problem and who could help us to solve it. And he knew, particularly in Cleveland at that time, how important it was to bring the business community into the fold, to bring that expertise. And he also tempered it with the politics and with George Forbes. But he carried that model for the rest of his career. And you know, right now in Columbus, Ohio, they have the Columbus Partnership. And, Pat Teaberry is head of...
the chamber?
No, he's... the Ohio Business Roundtable. And Pat Teaberry to this day talks about how George Voinovich was the guy who created the Ohio Business Roundtable and the Columbus Partnership. They used the model of what he did in Cleveland because it was successful. So to your point, Terry, I mean, he was about bringing people together, using every resource he had. He was never too proud to engage with people who he thought could help him solve his problems.
I'll just remember something, Terry, because you know your dad worked for him, and Andy Fedinsky's here, and Taras McClay from the Ukrainian Museum, and Tremont was such a neighborhood that was negatively impacted in the 60s by the freeway. And I remember when we were in the Plain Dealer and Cleveland.com, everyone was pushing to get the Interbelt Bridge done, and it was such a lift. And Senator Voinovich mustered whatever power he had, and he got the last chunk of funding, which is why the Interbelt Bridge is the Voinovich Bridge. Ironic, but not. Bridging Cleveland, bridging our community. And Tom Sursen's here. And Tom and the Slovenian men's choir, Fantina Vasi, sang a song in Slovenian and sang the national anthem, and I remember being on the bridge before it opened with the senator, and he was crying. And I thought, here's a guy that figured out how to get hundreds of millions of dollars in probably one of the nastiest places you could go to do trading and dealing, but he never forgot who he was and was so in touch with his roots that it was beautiful. Next question. All right, I'm going to ask a final question. The theme is Together We Can Do It. Ms. Sullivan, what is the senator saying to us now from above about Together We Can Do It from your perspective? Can we still do it together?
We definitely can still do it together. It's all about the human will and the human instinct to cooperate in things. And I do think that, there is so much toxicity in politics these days, but what we've heard about George Voinovich is that that was not him. And why was he successful? Because that was not him. He was always thinking about solutions, not partisan advantage. He was always, that was at least my perspective. He was very focused. He didn't want to spend money unnecessarily. So he didn't want us getting involved in unnecessary wars, but he also, worried about, the fighting forces. And, I do think that is, we need to put that first and foremost. My late husband was a military guy. It is wrong to send our military into harm's way when it is not necessary. And this is something that I feel very strongly about, that yes, we want the world's greatest military for our security, our safety, but we don't want to squander it. And I think that's a key point that maybe people aren't focused on in this whole kind of miasma of partisan warfare. But it's a very key point, and it will unite all of us.
Thank you. Dr. Kavnis, can we do this together?
George believed that together we can get it done. And he said to me one day, Theo, you know the motto of the state of Ohio? I wasn't thinking about it. He said, with God, all things are possible. That's right. So I think as a man of faith, he just believed you could do anything with God on your side. And if you were true to yourself and did the right thing, everything could be accomplished. So we always have hope. Never give up and stay the fight. You can win.
Faith Voinovich, can we do this together?
Absolutely, we can. There's a reason that the Voinovich School down at Ohio University is the Voinovich School of Leadership and Public Service.
Go Bobcats.
Go Bobcats. OUOF. Public service, not public policy, not public affairs, public service.
Public service.
The service to others, the service for your community, the service, the duty we all have that is called to serve others. And with that in mind, absolutely we can do it.
To the Sons of Collinwood, Mr. Cosgrove, are we doing it?
We're not doing it right now, but we can. I love when we left City Hall, he had the mayor signed a poster to all of us. You probably have this hanging on your wall as I do. He said, together we did it. And he did do it as mayor, and it's fantastic. But the answer is yes, we can. If we live the lessons that George Voinovich taught us, we can.
Councilman Plensick?
I too believe we can do it, but what we need today in Cleveland and across our country, we need believers. We really need believers in Cleveland. The gentleman who asked the question about the corporate community, George was able to mobilize the corporate community. He made them feel that they had to be a part of the solution rather than sit on the sideline. They had to be part of making changes and helping renovate and invest in our neighborhoods. If we're going to change the direction of Cleveland, because a lot of things need to be corrected, we need believers in the city. Everyone in this room needs to be a believer. George mobilized the believers. We got to get back to that again. We can and will make a difference. I pray every night that things go differently in our country. I'm greatly concerned. I think about my own children. I think about my grandkids. And I'm troubled by what I see in our country today. But you know what? Too many people are sitting on the sidelines. Half the people don't vote. George was able to mobilize people to vote, both Democrats and Republicans. He got them out. He got them involved in the process. So we can make a change, but it's up to each and every one of us to be a part of that solution. That's my own belief.
There's a saying that in life, applause for you, Michael, thank you. There's a saying I was reading in a book of prayer that in this time we die twice. We die when our souls leave our body and go to heaven. And the second time we die, and it's a permanent death, is the last time someone on earth speaks our name.
That's right.
Or knows of the good we did. I think it's safe to say that Senator Voinovich will be alive for the next millennium. To Councilman Polensek, to Mr. Tim Cosgrove, to Ms. Faith Voinovich, to Reverend Dr. Theophilus Cavanis, to Ms. Elizabeth Sullivan, a round of applause for our fantastic speakers. Thank you.
Wait a minute.
Thank you.
Invite everybody tomorrow, Saturday morning.
And everyone's welcome for the party of the year on Saturday at Cleveland Kurentovanje.
The parade at 12. Parade at 12.
Parade's at 12.
Right.
And